Welcome to episode 324 of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel. This week we'll be talking about PlayStation State of Play, Xbox's next console, Avowed gets reviews, and a bunch more. Before we get started, subscribe to the Baunfire Gaming Podcast on your favorite podcast app and leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, and subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this show and all of my other content, please check out the links in the show description. You can now leave a comment on the Spotify episode, leave a comment on the YouTube video, or join my Discord to chat with other listeners about all of this news and more. Gaming news, let's jump into the main story. PlayStation State of Play Showcase. Not a PlayStation Showcase, but a State of Play. They're different. The State of Plays are so interesting to me because they are always a disappointment. And not for me, like not for anyone who understands what they are. They're essentially third-party showcases, indie games, not all indie games, just third-party. Often games that Sony has timed exclusive for, and sometimes not. Sometimes they're just multi-platform. And then they tend to sprinkle in a couple of their like quote unquote lower tier first party games in there. And that's what this was. So it's always interesting to me, even as someone who's fairly critical of PlayStation and isn't a big PlayStation fan, even though I really respect what they've done as a business, at least like when it comes to just how they've just dominated the industry in their own way. It's always so interesting to see like Sony fans and everyone in general always be disappointed, as if they expected this to be some big, like, 5 first party AAA game announcement. It was going to be Santa Monica, Naughty Dog, and Insomniac were all going to announce their next things. The showcases typically aren't even that big, where the showcases tend to be the more first party focused shows. They're quote unquote bigger shows. They don't have them too often, to be honest. So I thought this was fine. It was just it's a bunch of multi-platform and third-party games. It is funny, and I hate that Xbox has started doing it too. Xbox used to be, from what I remember, during their showcases, a lot better about if a game was coming out on PlayStation or Switch or whatever, they would just, at the end of the trailer, at the bottom where it shows the platforms it's coming out on, Xbox trailers, I believe, in their showcases, used to just show all of the platforms. I believe they don't do that anymore. They just do Xbox and PC, I assume. And that's what PlayStation's always done. And when they do these showcases or these state of plays, it's always this like portrayal of like all of these games on PlayStation. I think it's kind of lame, but there's a reason they have sold like almost maybe 3 times as many consoles. We'll talk about that in a little bit, as Xbox this gen, and good for them. As for the actual announcements, Saros was announced. This is the new game from Housemarque. This is a first party studio, and they are the ones who made Returnal. I don't think that they've shown any gameplay or even any conceptual stuff. I think it's coming this year, if not in 2026. And I'm just gonna assume it's gonna be Returnal again. Obviously, updated, new mechanics, a new idea. But if you ever go back and see the first game they made, it was a lot like Returnal. It's kind of their thing, and Returnal is beloved and was pretty successful from what I remember, and so I assume that's what they're shooting for. So people are excited about that. That looks really cool. That definitely, to me, is a game that there's no chance I could ever play it. It's kind of like a roguelite in a way, and it's like a Souls roguelite kind of, but with guns, and it just looks like I would just get way too frustrated. So for the people excited about that, awesome. And then for the 8 people who were excited about this, Days Gone is getting a remaster. This is interesting. The Days Gone discourse is so curious to me because it just seems like it was just kind of like a mid game, which, like especially at the time that it came out, was not acceptable to PlayStation fans. They were in this run of extremely good first party, sad dad, over the shoulder action adventure story games, right? And this was one that didn't really hit the same way. Honestly, it's really corny and cheesy. You may know I'm not, a giant PlayStation fan. I watch at least one, if not multiple playthroughs of basically all their big games because I think they're pretty well experienced that way. The Last of Us and so on. I watched a playthrough of this, and it's kind of like Sons of Anarchy, the TV show, in a game where like, that show is entertaining, but I wouldn't say it's good. It's extremely cheesy and kind of corny and over the top and all that, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's kind of how I always saw Days Gone. Well, it's getting a remaster, and everyone can be excited about that. I don't know if details have come out. I didn't see it from my kind of brief scan of the news on this. I'm assuming it's going to be like all the other remasters. Now, this game is only like 4 or 5 years old. Maybe 6. It's getting close. I still, and I will harp on this until the end of days, that these are next gen patches. These are not remasters. These aren't remakes. Obviously, it's a completely different thing. But it just drives me crazy, and you'll see people like prop this and put it on their shoulders and say, "I love that they're going to charge me for this remaster." Where other platforms, not just Xbox, but on PC and stuff as well, like it's just a next gen patch is all this is. I'm sure it took work. It probably cost money, but I don't think that, and I know it's normally only $10 if you own the game already. But if it's only $10, then why charge for it at all? Like to me, it just seems like one of these things where PlayStation, in their genius, really, from a capitalist point of view, has taken what should just be a next gen patch. Like these are glorified next gen patches, unless we find out they're adding a bunch of tech in here. But even then, I still find it hard to defend, but maybe that's my bias coming out. I think it's interesting, and that this gets defended very vehemently. People are extremely okay with this, and they've been doing it for a long time. I think there's definitely been worse examples. I want to say like the remaster of The Last of Us 2. I assume it's out already. I have no. I can't remember. I assume came even quicker than this. It's Days Gone, so I'm sure most people just don't care, and it probably won't really sell that well. I just really wish, like this kind of stuff is why I hope that in their own way, Xbox becomes more competitive with PlayStation in the future, because if the current generation of PS5 and Series consoles was 50 million sold each, and they were neck and neck, and they were really fighting it out this generation, which they aren't, just to be clear. I don't think they would do stuff like this. I think they would do these and it'd be a next gen patch, and I don't think they would be bold enough to charge for this, even if it's only $10. And I think when I see people kind of doing the like, oh, Xbox is Sega, kind of implying that they're gonna, go away or stop making hardware, or just say that they're failing in general, even though the only metric we really ever hear about is console sales, and that's not really the whole story anymore. Anyways, we'll talk about that more later. I just, when it's this kind of stuff that I try to point to and be like, this is just the beginning. Like if I say Xbox dropped out one day and just stopped making stuff, I don't think that's going to happen. But say they did, like they would just do more of this and it would be worse. So, it's interesting. Beyond that, they did announce a bunch of multi-platform and third-party games, some that we knew about already, some that we didn't. Mind's Eye was one that people were really interested in. This is coming from a studio, and I think it was on Kind of Funny, they were talking about this, where there was a demo for a game like literally like 20 years ago. And from what I've read, this is that game. And so there was a tech demo for a game, I want to say it was 15 or 20 years ago at E3 or one of the showcases. And it was just like tech that it was just a cinematic. Like they claimed some of it was gameplay, and it wasn't, because the tech was 10 years away from then. Now, it looks old to us today and it looks awful. Because I went back and saw the trailer. Of course, I can't remember what the game was. It wasn't Agent. That was Rockstar. It was a different game. Um, and what's wild is from what I've seen and saw people talking about that this is Mind's Eye, the game that has eventually developed from that. So that's kind of interesting. Tides of Annihilation was really an interesting one. It kind of seems like Stellar Blade for non-gooners. It looks like a similar style of gameplay, but the characters, tits aren't hanging out everywhere, and at least not yet. Maybe there's gonna be downloadable content to get those babies out there, but that was an interesting one. I believe it's the same voice actress as I want to say Shadowheart from Baldur's Gate 3, who's also doing one of the lead characters in Claire Obscure Expedition 33, which comes out in a couple months. So she's having quite. It seems like most of those Baldur's Gate 3 voice actors, if they weren't already doing well, they're getting lots of attention now, and they deserve it. The performances in that game are like career defining. So, and then we also got the date for Metal Gear Solid Delta, which is the Snake Eater or Metal Gear Solid 3 remake from Konami. It's coming out on August 28th, and that is super exciting. I've never played that. I've played the original, like of the new ones. I've never played 2 actually. I played the original one, and I've played 4 and 5, and then some of the ones in between I've played as well, including the Raiden game, which is a whole different story. But that's exciting. I'm excited to play Delta. It looks like they've done a legitimately good job of remaking that, keeping Kojima's vision. It looks like they're still including some of the silliness and all that. That's really cool, and I hope he. I mean, they will credit him in that, even though I'm sure he had nothing to do with it. Man, it would be great if one day, even though time's not in Kojima's favor at this point, he's not a young man. Man, I'd kill to have him get one more shot at a Metal Gear Solid game, but I think that bridge has been burnt. But and then there was literally like a dozen more games that they showed of various kind of those like third party indie games that kind of get shown at every showcase as filler. But there was a lot of good stuff in there. People seemed excited about, but that's what I thought was notable. It seemed like a fine state of play. I never think these are all like the coolest things in the world, but that's how I go in. And so for what I expect from a state of play, this was fine. Good for them. The Staros announcement is really cool. I know people love Returnal. Like a lot of people really love Returnal. So that's a cool thing to see what that studio is up to. And it's good to see some first party action from PlayStation. It's not me just being like a console war like loser about this stuff. Like it is strange how little output they've had. Especially as we have Xbox seemingly getting into their kind of stride with games, and it seems like that's probably going to be the norm for them going forward because they have like 80 studios under their name. It seemed that should be expected. This is nice to see some movement. Now on when you look at it, I feel like the typical score for a Sony exclusive is in like the 9 range, where Xbox is more in the 8 range. And so, would you rather have more 8s or fewer 9s? You kind of get into that conversation. I think they're both great. So we will see what happens with that. Getting into some other stories, we have Avowed has hit kind of the early access period. It's not like development early access. You could pay to play it early, basically. And the embargo expired. We have a Metacritic score of 80 and an OpenCritic score of 81. To know the difference, the Metacritic score splits up platform, so there's PC and Xbox. People typically report on the higher, which I think they're both 80. OpenCritic combines reviews from all the platforms into one score, so they're basically the same, roughly 8 out of 10. The impressions of it are that it's well made. It doesn't have like huge bugs, or it runs fairly well. It is Unreal Engine 5, so that's sometimes not a guarantee. The idea is that from what I've gathered, it's basically Obsidian decided to make a really like the best AA high fantasy RPG they could make, set in the Pillars of Eternity world, and that's what they did. My own experience, I have about 5 hours into it already. The combat is insane. It's extremely good. I'm playing on Series X. The combat is very weighty, very meaty, very punchy. It's combat's great, honestly. Um, it's a pretty game. Playing on Xbox Series X on performance mode, it's a little rough. You can definitely see the FSR doing some heavy lifting there. It's some of the, especially shadows and stuff, don't look great. It gets a little fuzzy in certain parts. I actually haven't tried it on quality mode yet, so I need to check that out. Um, Man, it's so good. Like, I'm enjoying it so much. What it feels like, my honest take on it, and what I've said to other people, is it feels a lot like a Mass Effect trilogy game, and at least in the way, kind of like missions and stuff, like the way you go out and do stuff, but especially like the dialogue scenes and the way dialogue works. It feels very Mass Effect trilogy esque, even the like the shots and stuff. It's definitely inspired by Baldur's Gate 3. I'm not gonna sit here and be like, oh, it's Baldur's Gate 3. It's not. It's a lower level of game, right? But it's still really good. Like, that's not every game is going to be Baldur's Gate 3. In fact, there may never be another game like that. And so yeah, like that combination of like Baldur's Gate 3 and Mass Effect trilogy, like that's kind of like the vibe, that I would give for it. Not the combat. The combat is like, you can play third person. I don't suggest it, but first person, like high fantasy, you got bows, you got magic, you can be do wizard stuff, you have sword and board, you have double-handed weapons. It's and you can do any of those things, and you can switch up your specialization, your skills, and all that whenever you want. It's a fun game to play. So far, the story, I think it's really interesting, and I've liked it so far. That's been one of some of the criticism I saw was about the story. So far, I'm into it. So maybe it's just me. Um, One of the highlights for me is that the first NPC, the first companion you interact with and have, is Kai, and and they are voiced by Brandon Keener. And if you don't know who that is, they are the voice of Garrus in the Mass Effect trilogy, as well as, actually, if you're a Division fan, if you're listening to this, you might be. It's Isaac, the voice of the AI, or at least one of the AIs. And it's, for me, like, a part of me doesn't know if I even like Avowed that much, or if I just love hearing Brandon Keener. I mean, it's basically Garrus. Like, the character is, they're a former like mercenary, and just some of their quips and stuff. Like, they talk about being in a squad and things like that. And then I posted a clip on social media or on my YouTube as well that you can check out. There's like the famous romance line between Femshep and Garrus in the trilogy, talking about that he has reach and she has flexibility. If you're into Mass Effect, you've almost certainly heard it 100 times. Um, in Avowed, there's a line where you're challenging this commander to a duel, and he's gonna help you fight, and he says, "I've got the reach," and like, it's so clearly a call out to Mass Effect. And like, I don't know, something about this game, Avowed. It's a high fantasy, mostly first person, at least my experience, double A game, yet it's honestly the closest I feel like I've played to a Mass Effect game since Guardians of the Galaxy a few years ago, which was much more similar to the Mass Effect games. But just, it's like the tone and the vibe, and just, it's hard to explain, but that's what I would say. Um, Overall, I think that this like 8 out of 10 score is probably, obviously I still have a lot of gameplay left before I can make like a final review or whatever, which I will eventually. I think it fits perfect. I'm not going to come out and say it's some like masterpiece game that's done everything perfectly, and that the people who are giving it, like, it is one of those things where, like, I can see, like a 7 out of 10 or a 6, I guess. Like, if it just didn't connect to you, or if there were things about it, because it's definitely like a stiff RPG, where it's like you play Red Dead Redemption 2, or people have cited Cyberpunk. I think Cyberpunk feels very cardboard and thin as well, but some people don't. Not everyone agrees with that, which is fine. But there's just some of these RPGs where you do feel like you're in like a living world. The Fallout games to a point did this pretty well, where like, the market owners would be selling their stuff, and then you'd see at a certain time at night they'd close up shop and walk back to their house, which was a place you could go. And I've seen that cited by people as like, like Avowed doesn't feel really lived in because everything's just there all the time. No one's really moving around. No one has their like day-to-day tasks. It's just a bunch of NPCs waiting for you to walk by them or talk to them, right? But that's how like a lot of RPGs are. And in one of this scale and this scope, it probably just wasn't really in the and it just wasn't in their scale or scope to do this whole giant, thing where everyone has their daily tasks they're doing all day. Like it's not that game, at least from what we can tell. So that doesn't bother me. If it does you, obviously check out other people's reviews who have actually finished the game and stuff like that. Maybe it all falls apart. But so far, I think the gameplay is a ton of fun. I like the quests I've been on so far. I think the main story is interesting. I like the companion I have so far. I've only gotten one of I think there's 4 total. So I'm still waiting to find more. I don't know if I'm missing them or what. I really want to go back and play. I'm in the middle of a Baldur's Gate 3, another playthrough, and that's completely on hold right now. I'm also waiting on patch 8, but that's a different story. But I want to keep going and playing it. I suspect I'll finish it by the end of the month, and then I'll do either a review here on the podcast or a separate video, or maybe both. We'll see. Next story, Xbox's next console has left the pitch stage and has been fully approved by the appropriate executives, to the point where this was reported by Jez Corden, that it's been like basically they have all the financials set, which I assume means that they finalized hardware, so they know how much each thing's going to cost, how much it's going to cost to put it together. Now they're actually going to start doing that and probably work on designs and things like that, even though part of the pitch may be the design. Like, I still don't think that those rumors of them putting out a new hardware in 2026 are crazy. I still think it's possible, if not likely. I don't think they care. It's not like the series is selling like hotcakes, so they're not really going to steal sales from themselves at this point. If they really are moving into this stage where they're going to put their games anywhere they can, but they're still going to offer a subsidized way to play it that will be like probably the best quote unquote way to play their games, especially for Game Pass. And if you don't want to mess around with the PC, it doesn't seem unlikely to me that they could put out a console as early as 2026 or as maybe as late as 27. I just don't think it's that far away. And even though I don't think they're out here trying to like compete with PlayStation directly in that way anymore, I also suspect they wouldn't hate being able to have a year or two of saying, oh, hey, we have the best console. Then the PlayStation 6 will come and it'll be a little bit better. And I really think it would actually probably benefit both companies to not release consoles within the same 12 months anymore. I think doing that leapfrog thing would probably be good for both of them at the end of the day. But I really just don't believe Xbox is obsessed with the console sales anymore. At least I hope they're not, because the next story we'll talk more about that. But I think it's pretty clear that they are just trying to focus on selling as many games as they can, as many Game Pass subscriptions as they can, and that it's going to turn into this thing where the console is likely just going to be a thing that they provide for the people who want it, and they'll still propose it as like a good deal, because I'm sure it probably will be, right? Especially if they keep subsidizing it, which I think they will. This is big news. I think it's a big deal to find out that they've settled on whatever the next console is going to be. Now we go through a year or 2 years or whatever of development to get it all together, get it out to publishers and studios and all that, so that they can, make their games for it. Because I really do believe this is going to turn more into a thing of, it may be hard to even consider this a next gen console. It's just going to be an updated Xbox. And I truly believe that obviously Nintendo's sticking with the generations thing, which they should, because it works for them. PlayStation probably will, because they're still living in the 2010s or even the 2000s, and it's working for them. So who cares? They're fine. But Xbox definitely seems like they're trying to move on to a different way of proposing all this stuff and selling it. And, hopefully things work for all three of them. I will almost certainly buy this Xbox when it comes out. I like having that. For me, as a content creator who does, videos and things like that, I just like using it basically as a second PC. Where if you see streamers and content creators who have two PC setups, it's like a budget second PC for me, and it's worked really well for my purposes so far. So we'll see what happens with that. In related news, probably, PlayStation has sold over 75 million PS5s. That includes the Slim and the Pro. Um, I mean, that's insane. It's really impressive. I believe it's something along the lines of they're on a similar track as the PS4, which is extremely good, especially for the price. And that I believe even like in the last 12 months or something, they're actually ahead of the PS4, or that something about like the last period of time is the most systems they've ever sold that even the PS4 didn't beat, or something like that. So it's wild. It's what I was talking about before, that they haven't had like any high profile releases in a really long time. They had Astrobot last year, which supposedly hasn't even sold very well. It's only sold maybe a million or two copies. So that's not driving consoles. Um, and then before that, it was like Spider-Man a couple years ago, and then Ragnarok before that. Obviously, they've had the third-party exclusive games like Final Fantasy 16 and 7 Rebirth, and Helldivers 2 is like a kind of a second-party game. And I'm sure those things have moved units, even though Helldivers didn't sell that great on PlayStation either, it sounds like. I don't know. I don't know how they're moving them, but they are, and it's probably just off of being the most popular and the biggest, at least between them and Xbox. It was interesting. The same report that had this though was claiming that Xbox has only sold 26 million Series X consoles, or Series consoles in general. I believe the split on that is believed to be about 50-50. I think it's slightly in favor of the Series X. At least that's been the most recent things. I did read a couple interesting articles by some analysts who are saying that it's pretty likely that 26 million number for Xbox is probably pretty inaccurate, even though we do know that their sales have been down pretty significantly compared even to the Xbox One. But that basically what I gathered is that the ways of measuring in the regions that they focus on to kind of guess how many of these consoles have been sold are a lot better to guess for PlayStation than they are Xbox. And that the simple fact is that PlayStation, knowing that they're selling more, probably makes it more likely for them to release more accurate information or to seed it out there. So I don't think it really matters. I think the only people who really care how many Xboxes are being sold nowadays are like the super Xbox fanboys who are like obsessed with it for some reason, or the console warrior folks who use it as ammunition one way or the other. I don't think most people care. The average Xbox fan, I don't think really gives a crap how many consoles are sold. I just don't think the average gamer really cares that much. But for kind of the extremists in the community, as well as journalists and influencers who kind of use it as bait, at least in some capacity, it's a pretty big deal for them. So the simple fact is we'll probably never really know how many were sold. PlayStation will almost certainly make official numbers at some point, especially if they hit 100 million or something like that. Xbox will probably be quieter, because my guess is it's not as impressive of a number, even if it's not really a focus for them. So we'll see. Michael Gamble, this is some of my Mass Effect stuff leaking into the podcast. Project director on the next Mass Effect game at BioWare tweeted, quote, "Well, that was the single coolest meeting I've had in years. Thanks, Mary," with a winky face. This is in reference to narrative director Mary DeMarley. She's formerly of, was it Eidos, I believe, who did Deus Ex, the 2 Deus Ex games, and Guardians of the Galaxy. She was the narrative director on all of those. She's like my single greatest hope for that game. I have a lot of hope for that game and for the next Mass Effect. But Mary DeMarley, because of, I mentioned it before, Guardians of the Galaxy being one of the most recent games that I thought kind of captured like what a modern Mass Effect game would feel like. Guardians of the Galaxy did it perfectly, in my opinion, and the way it handled dialogue and choices and all of that, squad, banter and all of that. I'm extremely happy to have her in that position. And Mike Gamble saying, it sounds like on Friday they probably had a significant meeting. We know that the game is currently in pre-production. I would imagine they're getting towards the end of that. And I have to imagine that, even though I know narrative and dialogue and all that can change a lot during development. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they had some big all hands on meeting on Friday between the narrative folks, the ones who are left, unfortunately, and Gamble and probably other directors, just making their pitch for what the game is going to be story wise and characters and all that. So um, there were multiple other people from BioWare who are still there working on the Mass Effect game, who all like retweeted this out or made some reference to it. So it sounds like this was probably a big like BioWare wide thing. And I certainly hope this means that they're well on their way to full production. I've hoped that, probably by summer that they'll announce they're in full production. We'll start seeing what they're going to do with development. My guess is it's going to be like Battlefield, where they're going to pull in other studios to help them, kind of on the Ubisoft model. It's actually what EA is currently doing with Battlefield, where they have 4 studios working on that. It's DICE and Ripple Effect as like Battlefield studios. And then they have EA Motive, as well as Criterion, both helping as well. My guess is that we're going to find out that the next Mass Effect will be co-developed by BioWare. I'm guessing Motive and likely 1 or 2 other studios, but we'll have to wait and see what they say about that when that time comes, and hopefully it comes. Things are a little rocky over there at BioWare. More Death Stranding 2 details are expected at SWSX in March, according to Kojima and his studio. This was one I really did expect at the State of Play for PlayStation, but it wasn't there. I think that's due out this year, I'm pretty sure. And so I've played the first one. It's on Xbox now, and I've dabbled in it. It feels like a Kojima game. It's crazy attention to detail, very beautiful. It didn't really grab me. I definitely want to try it more over time. But I get it. I just don't know if I'm gonna like get it, but we'll have to wait and see. Relic Entertainment, who has made, I believe, Age of Empires and the Company of Heroes games, as well as a bunch of other ones, is doubling down on more new IP and things like that after leaving Sega. So Sega was their publisher. They're now independent. And I'm really curious how that's going to play out. I believe, if I remember correctly, they are the ones who actually make Age of Empires. It's kind of like similar like Helldivers 2 for PlayStation, where Microsoft owns the Age of Empires IP, but it's worked on by a third-party studio. I believe Flight Simulator is the same way. So we'll have to see about that. I've actually been on an Age of Empires kick lately, playing 2, the definitive edition. I've tried to dive into 4 again, and I just don't like it. It's, I don't know, just not my thing. I don't really care for it. Same for Company of Heroes 3, which came out a couple years ago. Company of Heroes 2 is one of my favorite games ever. And Company of Heroes 3 and Age of Empires 4, I didn't like it because in the games before them, Age of Empires 2, Company of Heroes 2, they both felt like you were actually controlling like individual units. And then in the new games, Age of Empires 4 and Company of Heroes 3, you feel like you're controlling like a symbol of a group of units. So kind of like some of the other like turn-based games, combat, strategy games and things like that. It's real time, and I don't know. It just never grabbed me the same way. They kind of lost their charm to me, at least. So we'll see what happens with Relic. That's a old school studio that I do not want to see go away, but them being independent is kind of scary. Alan Wake 2 has finally reached 2 million units sold, and has made back its development costs, which I assume means it's profitable now. So it's good for them. As acclaimed as that game was, it's kind of wild that it just hasn't really sold all that well. But it's kind of, Alan Wake, I think, is one of those games that people always thought was a bigger deal than it is. Was more popular than it really is. It's kind of a niche game that everyone like respects, So, 2 not really selling that great isn't that surprising. I love that game. It is one of my favorite games. Was that last year, I guess, it came out. It's just really cool. Some insane storytelling, some really creative ways of telling story. A musical number in the middle of a horror game is not what I expected. So good for them. They also announced that Control 2 has begun full production, while also saying that the FBC Firebreak, which is like a multiplayer game set in the Control universe, which Alan Wake is also technically in the Control universe, uh, that game is still in development, as well as the Max Payne remakes, which I think are due out this year. And because of the way things work, if Control 2 is now in full production, that means that there's available developers in their studio. So I have to imagine that means that either Firebreak or the Max Payne remakes are like wrapping up development, because I'm sure they're hiring, but you probably don't have like Control 2 is going to be a big AAA you know development team. It's not just going to be 20 people and that. So I imagine one of those games they're currently working on will come out sooner and later. They should be wrapping up. Ubisoft's Yves Guillemot says that the publisher will focus on live service and open world games. Wow, mind blown. I cannot believe that Ubisoft is going to focus on open world and live service games. That is truly groundbreaking news there, Yves. Thank you so much. I thought for sure you guys were not going to do that. Supposedly they're going to have news on upcoming games in May, because once Assassin's Creed Shadows comes out, I don't really know what's supposed to be next. You assume there's going to be a Far Cry game at some point. We know they're working on the Division 3, but that's probably 4 years away at least. The Splinter Cell game hasn't been talked about in a long time. I don't know. I'm curious to what else they have on the docket other than their NFT games that they release but don't advertise at all, because they know everyone hates them. So we'll see. Speaking of AC Shadows, they claim that the pre-orders are going extremely well, and they're tracking with Odysseys. And I believe Odyssey, I want to say, is the first or second best-selling Assassin's Creed game ever. Assassin's Creed is one of those games that, Mirage was kind of a letdown because I just don't think it was a very good game. People are dogging on Shadows, and there's all of the grifter console or culture warrior stuff going on with it. People buy AC, man. There's people who all they do is play Assassin's Creed games, and I think there's a whole lot of them. And I don't think they care much about the rabble rousers out there trying to turn it into something it's not. So I'll be curious how that releases, and if I get a review code or not. I have put in for one. And then Unity and Crytek both had significant layoffs, leading to Crytek pausing development on the next Crysis game. So if you wanted, I think it's like Crysis 4 or something, you're going to probably be waiting maybe forever. We'll have to wait and see. This is notable. These are two of the, to call them competitors to Unreal Engine is maybe not completely honest, because they are way smaller operations. Unity is probably a little bigger than Crytek, but these are the little engines that try. So it's good to have competition, even if it's not very competitive. It's arguably a similar situation as Microsoft and PlayStation, at least in the console space. You don't want to see people lose their jobs, and you want to see devs have more options for engines than just Unreal. So hopefully they can figure it out. Before we wrap it up here, I do have some content updates. I want Shepard back in Mass Effect next. Is a video I made, and it will be posting next Tuesday. But if you are a YouTube member, you can check that out right now. Work is going to be real busy for me for the next, at least the next few weeks. We have some new stuff going on in my job, so I'm going to be very busy. So streams and videos may slow down a bit, even though every time I say this, I end up doing it more. But that's the expectation. The podcast should be fine. And obviously the other podcast, the Mass Effect Hypecast, there's a new episode posted if you want to check that out. And I just assume I'll do another episode when there's any news to talk about with that. So be on the lookout for that. And for anyone who's been paying attention for a long time to my content, it doesn't seem real, but my little one is 5 years old now, and she just lost her first tooth this week. So that is making me feel old. So that's a good way to wrap up the content update there. If you have any questions or feedback, be sure to comment on Spotify or YouTube. Let me know in my Discord or hit me up on social media at Bondiesel or at the Baunfire. Thank you so much for listening to the whole show, and please consider supporting it via the links in the description. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. Until next time.